Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the UCM Podcast. Very excited to be with you once again. I am Dr. Bill Davis, and I am excited to have our guest on today. Back to the podcast, Dr. John Stenberg. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Stenberg.
Thanks, Dr. Davis. Always fun to get with you and chat through. I love talking about upper cervical. I love practicing it, but just the concepts that we work with in upper cervical and the science and the philosophy and the art of it is just something I'm really excited about. So always appreciate an opportunity to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, how this kind of started this particular conversation. I saw a post I think you made on Facebook, and I was intrigued by it and wanted to dive more into it. Thought I had some good value for our audience. And so, but before we get into our topic for the day, just anybody out there who doesn't know you, Doc, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. I'm Dr. John Stenberg. I graduated from Life University in Marietta in 2016, moved out to Colorado Springs and opened my practice, practicing Blair Upper Cervical Chiropractic here at Zenith Upper Cervical Chiropractic at that time, and have been practicing in my practice here since then.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, this is I think the second time you've been on the podcast, but this is a whole different topic. And so let's get into what we're talking about today, really building a therapeutic alliance and how that really impacts your patient results and your practice and all of that. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce the concept first of all, and so we can get started here.
Well, I really appreciate you inviting me on to talk about this topic. When I made that post, the visual was just something I put together to share in my patient emails. And I'm reading research on these topics. And as I'm trying to synthesize these like really heady ideas and relay important bits of information about evolving science to our patients, this is a graphic that I put together. I actually didn't mean to post it on Facebook. It meant to go out on Instagram, but it got sent to Facebook as well. And it prompted some interesting discussions. So I appreciate you following up and, thinking about like, what does this have to do with marketing or sort of the brand of upper cervical chiropractic? You and I were just talking about how, the emerging science is supporting this idea that what we call a therapeutic alliance has a direct measurable impact on patient outcomes, meaning the results that we get in our offices are obviously largely due to the clinical work we do in upper cervical care, but we're also starting to appreciate that there are all these other aspects of the patient's relationship with the practice that also have an impact on their results. So for me, when I see something like that, I'm thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity for us to see what the science is pointing towards in a modern healthcare setting. These opportunities that we have to elevate our results, build a stronger connection with our patients, be a brighter light of health and healing in our communities. And so thinking about what is the practice value of this, creating a strong therapeutic alliance, I think it comes down to three things. One is we are always seeking to exceed expectations, right? How many folks have we dealt with that have just had very poor customer service or very poor healthcare experiences? And we make a really, pronounced effort to exceed those expectations. We also are attempting to earn trust. Chiropractic has so many interesting ideas about health and healing that can afford folks a fresh perspective and are really empowering, in my opinion. But we have to earn trust to impart those ideas to folks. And it also creates a strong bond with our practices, but then also the brand of upper cervical. So whether you are, following up with the leads that upper cervical marketing is helping to connect with your practice, or you're networking with other healthcare practitioners, these are ways that we can, I think, develop strong roots into the things that upper cervical chiropractic emphasizes, which is natural health and healing, conservative, but individualized ways to achieve that. So in my opinion, it plays right into our strengths in upper cervical care. And of all of the sort of healthcare practices that focus on helping folks with musculoskeletal pain, and I know that's not, the extent of our work, but it's also plays right into our hands. So I think it's first important to understand, like, what does this even mean? It sounds like these theoretical terms. So what is this therapeutic alliance? I think it's important to differentiate that this is a little bit of a twist on the quote doctor-patient relationship. And as we talk through this, I think that'll be clear. But the first step is creating a meaningful dialogue. And we'll talk about some action steps with each of these. The second step is promoting active participation. It's really getting folks to engage with and become really intentional and accountable to their results. We understand how important that is, but ways that we can, throughout the new patient process and the environments in our office, make that actionable. And the third part is what they call synchronization, which is kind of for me, it was a hard thing to nail down, but really the cool part about this, Dr. Davis, as we get into the neuroscience of it, is synchronization is all about creating sensory events that the nervous system uses to reduce prediction errors. And so what that really means is, when folks are encountering a new idea, let's say upper cervical chiropractic, they may have no idea about it. They may have some idea about it. They may be skeptical. They may be excited, right? They come to our offices with some sort of, baseline, and they're going to filter the experience of being in our office, both the things they see and hear and experience, through these prior beliefs. And the nervous system is really keen at taking clues from the environment to adjust those prior beliefs. And so understanding that there is real neurophysiological event to all of these things that influence, that's how those patient outcomes are influenced. So when I got to that part of it, it blew my mind, and I felt was a really, really powerful topic worth diving into. And there are just simple ways that we can pull out these components of the therapeutic alliance and fine tune some office procedures or things that we do with patients day in and day out that can leverage that synchronization, leverage the brain's constant processing of that sensory experience to improve our patient outcomes and do the things we mentioned before. So
let me jump in here, Doc. So this is really interesting because so many times we think about, okay, every upper cervical doctor wants to get great results, right? Like that's what feeds us in many ways, right? We love seeing patients get well. We love seeing people get hope and healing. But what you're starting to talk about here is that there's more to it as far as getting results in your practice than just giving a great adjustment.
100%.
Right. And that's something that all of us need to be aware of and appreciate, because it's a person that you're taking care of, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just a spine. Mm-hmm. It's not just a subluxation. It's not, you're taking care of a person, and you have to appreciate that and connect with them as a person in order for them to get the best possible results, and ultimately for them to be able to tell others as well.
100%. And realizing that there are, on the neurological side of it, there are conscious and unconscious influences on that process, right? And I know that you guys have talked with guests about things like overcoming objections, right? Yep. Overcoming objections. If there are objections, that tells us there's friction, right? It's called predictive processing, but the nervous system is having a hard time reconciling the messaging and the language and the experience that it's being confronted with. And so it's pushing back, right? So rather than try to talk around it and try to overcome those objections, even in that language, it's an authoritarian, approach to it. I think, can we create sensory clues that allow the nervous system to identify with the language and to relate to the process and to feel a sense of hope and encouragement in each step of the process, so that, number one, you're overcoming objections less, and you are leveraging that therapeutic alliance to bolster those results. And obviously, this is no substitute for good upper cervical work, right? You can't just talk people into good results. You've got to deliver the goods. And you guys have had lots of conversations about that. At the end of the day, the assumption here is you are certified in your technique. You're doing a great job of your chiropractic objectives. And then this is the cherry on top.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the difference between getting good results in your practice and getting great results, right? Like if you want that great practice, that impactful practice that's making a huge impact in your community, then you got to be paying more attention to just the spines, right? You got to be thinking about the whole person. So let's talk about, some ways to do that. Let's get into some of these specifics.
Absolutely. And to your point, Dr. Bill, I think some people would call it that something, and some quote masters maybe intuitively did these things without realizing they were doing it, just as a byproduct of their personality or their values. But for the rest of us that are striving towards that mastery, it's cool to see that we can actually break it down into actionable steps and work towards that on purpose. Yeah. So in this realm of creating a meaningful dialogue, I mean, this obviously starts with the messaging that you guys are putting out there that is connecting with folks as far as here's a potential solution for you, right? And what happened, everything that happens after that patient comes into the office and you guys did your job and made that connection. I mean, you understand how fulfillment on that is huge and the results that those patients get. So, I mean, this is basic stuff, but really don't underestimate the importance here. Making eye contact. I mean, active listening, right? We hear about these terms that get thrown around, but how easy is it when you're busy, you're kind of bustling around, the folks at the front desk are answering the phone, they're rescheduling, they're doing their things. That bit of eye contact, it's one of those sensory clues. It's a human now that shows care and empathy. And it's such an easy thing to forget about and to notice when those times, now that you're paying attention to it, you'll notice opportunities to just kind of take a beat, and 2 seconds of eye contact with someone is a connecting point.
Absolutely.
And this is for sure in your new patient interview, your consultation. I mean, as a patient is talking to you about their experience, you need to be locked in on them, right? You need to be making eye contact and mirroring that nonverbal communication. Folks that know about mirror neurons and all that sort of thing. There is a thing that we sometimes do intuitively, and a lot of sales processes teach some of this too, but it's adapting your body language, like reading the patient's nonverbal cues and then sort of mimicking or adapting yours so that you find yourself in alignment with their nonverbal communication. That builds trust unconsciously. If someone's real closed off, they're sitting there, with their arms crossed and they're kind of leaning back, and if you're going to barge into their system and be, into their space and be very, outgoing and be very assertive and be very, close to them, like that's going to be a problem. And so observing these things and making subtle adaptations are ways that you can start to create that meaningful dialogue, right? We want folks to engage in a conversation with us. Sure, we want to hear about, their symptoms and their history, but we also want to be able to relay to them our knowledge and expertise. And so we've got to earn their trust to be able to do that. And these are simple ways. Repeating back key insights aligns mental states and reinforces a collaborative culture in your practice. And it can be something as simple as, so Mary, I understand that what I'm hearing is, these migraines that you're having are really draining you of your energy, and you're starting to pull back from social engagements because you're worried about having an attack. And on top of that, it seems like the folks in your life don't really understand how much you're suffering through this migraine experience. Am I understanding that correctly? I mean, so right there, if you had made eye contact, you matched that nonverbal communication, you paid attention, observed those key insights, and then repeated it back. I mean, what a strong connecting point for a patient to think, man, he actually gets it. Someone who sees the impact here can call it out, can identify it, listened to what I said, and then repeat it back to me. I mean, that's a great way to create that meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, I was going to say that is an absolute must in a new patient consultation, is to identify the need behind the need. Yep. Right. They're always, they're going to say, I have whatever, right? I have symptoms. I have the migraines. I have vertigo. I have whatever it is. But that's not why they're there. There's a reason behind why they're there. And what you just said, how you were active listening and you repeated that back to them, you confirmed what they said to you, you are helping to identify that need behind the need. And if you get that is the most important part of a consultation. If 100%. You can get that one connecting point of getting to that need behind the need of why they're actually there, then the rest of the process will be so much easier. If you don't get to that, then you're like you said, if they're closed off to you and you're not able to connect with them during that consultation, then the rest of the process is going to be so much more difficult.
Well, you've just proven yourself to be a trusted ally, right? And that's the whole point of this process. Right. And to skip to number, exactly.
I'm your guide. I'm taking you to where you want to go, right? But first you have to understand where they want to go.
Well, you have to help them understand sometimes too, right? Sometimes folks haven't even really identified the need behind the need on their own. So being a leader in this model and facilitating that conversation helps them identify the need. And if they come with it, that's even better. But a lot of times we've got to kind of draw it out of them too.
Yep.
And I'm going to skip to number 5, because in this vein of communication, I've noticed this, Dr. Bill, and you may weigh in. Folks tend to talk in one of two ways, and I call them feelers or doers. And so you'll see some folks that say, man, I really feel like this is happening, and I hate the way that this feels. And when I do this activity, this is what I feel. And then you feel there's other people that are more doers in their conversation. They say, I'm having a hard time accomplishing this task. At work, when I'm doing this activity is when I feel the pain, or these are the hobbies and activities I want to get back to doing, right? So if you notice and listen, you'll see that these general categories will kind of present themselves. And so just like with the body language, reciprocate that language to the patient, right? It's an easy way to just kind of, meet them on that level and communicate with them in terms that are important to them. And looking at these little details, I mean, it's a subtle thing, but it can really make a big difference.
And I would say too, that it's in many cases, it's related to personality type as well, right? Someone who's more of a feeler is that they have more likely if you look at the DISC model, for instance, right, more of I's and S's are in that feeler type of a role versus a doers are the D's and the C's, right? And so those kind of insights into the person, into their personality is key when you go into the rest of your process, right? If someone is a feeler, if they are in that kind of situation, then you got to make sure you're connecting with them in a different way in the exam and definitely in the report, as opposed to someone who is a doer, right? If someone is a high D driver personality, then they don't need you to be connecting with them in the same way. They need you to be very action oriented, very focused on what you're going to do for them to get them back to doing the things they want to do, right?
Absolutely. And the great thing about this is it's not creepy, like you're not trying to trick them or manipulate them. You are just, this is person-centered care. It's really taking it to that next level. Absolutely. Yeah. And listen more than talk. And this is one that I know I've struggled with and a lot of upper cervical docs can relate to. We got to acknowledge that education is a process that happens over time. These first couple visits, especially if your goal is to create a meaningful dialogue, do not overwhelm them with information and miss these opportunities to kind of put those anchors into the therapeutic alliance. Because if folks trust you and they continue with you over time, you've got lots of opportunities to build on the education. And in the deep dive on this, you can then leverage these concepts in your patient education with a person-centered approach to make chiropractic ideas seem like their ideas, right? And connect with them on a level that's already in line with their values. So,
and I love that too. And this is what we talk about a lot with our doctors is having milestones, being focused on milestones rather than on scripts as much as on milestones, meaning like, hey, for instance, in the consultation, you got to get the need behind the need. And another thing is you need to connect their current symptoms to past traumas, right? If you can do those two things in a consultation, that is huge, right? Because you're starting the educational process that, hey, you know what? Things that happened in your past are affecting your present. And if you can just begin to plant that seed, it's going to make such a huge difference going forward. And like you said, it's not about educating them and doing a report during your consult. You got to listen more than you speak. But those are two simple ones that if you can hit those milestones in that consult, you're beginning this relationship in the right way.
Yeah, and don't talk them out of it, right? And on top of that, Bill, we're understanding now, this neuroscience research is understanding that not only is that good for the patient to kind of walk through the process, but it's actually influential on how they experience relief and how their results come out at the end. So that's the cool part about this, is it's right in alignment with our main objective, which is to get exceptional results. So speaking of, and because you were kind of hinting at this, promoting active participation, the patient has to be engaged in their care process, right? We all know that. And so a couple ways that you can promote active participation, they need to be able to see themselves as a contributor to their outcome, right? So one of the ways I think is most powerful to do this, and this is, all from the research as well, is get functional goals up front. And this kind of goes to the why behind the why. Then how do you make that into those milestones, right? How do you pull those
Yeah.
milestones out in real, tangible, day-to-day functional ways? And I've got, multiple sections on my intake forms that try to draw this out. And then we have time to talk about that during the consult. So even before they meet with me the first time, there has already been an opportunity to share those. I've already got timelines associated with short and long-term goals on those prompts to answer those questions so that they're thinking in terms of timelines. And there's a lot of ways that you can start to get them thinking about function and start emphasizing function right from the get-go. And then obviously making that a part of the consult and working through those things and making them specific and measurable.
That's key. I mean, basically activities of daily living, right? You got to get dialed in on understanding on how whatever their symptoms are affecting their life, right? Because that both is most of the time that is the need behind the need. And then also the other part of it, like you said, is that's what we can be working towards, right? Let's get you back on the golf course. Let's get you back, being able to pick up your grandson. Let's do those things that are meaningful to them. And like you said, that's when you are our partnership in their health.
And as an action step here, which is, to jump down to number 3 here in these ways to promote active participation, this is a good audit thing. If you can't visibly and quickly reference those goals on a patient visit, that's a problem. You've got to create a way for those goals to be front and center so that you can frequently check on those, right? Because folks come in and they talk about their symptoms, how they're feeling for the last however long, right? So having those goals easily referenced in those interactions, my neck's hurting so bad, doc, blah, 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 how it is. We need to reorient folks back to, okay, well, how are we doing? How was your round of golf this weekend? I know that you guys were heading out to the ski slopes. Any trouble when you were, so reorient. But if you forget or you don't have, especially a really busy practice, if you don't have those, easily accessible to reference, you're going to have a really hard time. And one of the things that I think happens with a lot of patients when they're really enthusiastic in the beginning, and some of this stuff kind of the ball gets dropped on this stuff later, is we have a really high buy-in initially, and then they kind of peter out, right? Their enthusiasm starts to fade. And we try to find ways to re-engage them, but this is the way to keep the engagement the whole way through and also make the care process adaptable. So you may modify your treatment schedule. You may need to make referrals. You may, celebrate progress. You may need to provide a little bit more support depending on how they're doing, both symptomatically and with those functional goals. And the research also suggests that we need to provide folks reasonable timelines for both symptom relief and those functional goals. They want to understand when they're going to feel better, when they're going to be better, right? And this is where your clinical experience and your chiropractic values and concepts of healing really come into play in being able to do your new patient workup, do your upper cervical analysis and all your exam procedures, look at those goals and say, here's where you are, here's where we want to go. This is the process that it's going to take for us to get there. And that's, again, all these things kind of build on the next step and reinforce this idea that you are a knowledgeable ally. You are someone who sees and understands and is applying care in a way that's unique to my needs. And that's exactly what we want folks to think of upper cervical care.
And this brings up 2 things that are crucial in order for this to be facilitated within their practice. One is making sure that you give them a care plan, right? They need a care plan, right? I'm so excited. Our most recent survey that we just did, 93% of doctors in the survey are using care plans. That was the highest we've ever seen it. So that's awesome. And that's what you're telling them. You're giving them an understanding of what they can expect. People need to understand that. And then number 2 is making sure that you're doing progress exams.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
If you are not doing progress exams, you don't have a specific dedicated time to focus in on this kind of milestones that you're looking to accomplish with them, right? This is when you go back and you make sure that you hit all those goals that they had, right? This is when you're looking at those activities of daily living. This is when you're seeing all the different ways that their bodies is adapting to being in alignment, right? That's, if you don't do progress exams, you're missing out on this. Like you're just not, especially like you said, if you're in a busy practice, you're not going to have the time to really have these conversations unless you have dedicated time set aside as part of your care plan.
100%. I'm really glad you made that point. I've got some, Dr. Bill will share these resources with you later, but I kind of made two separate deep dive tracks on this, one for higher volume offices and one for solo doc offices, where we get into some practical application steps for each of those settings. And I get into that on that. So access those resources. I'll share a bit about that at the end. But the last point here on promoting active participation, I think is really on brand with upper cervical care. And this is kind of what you're talking about too, is this concept of meaning making. And in the research, they call it embodied cognition. But essentially, we are trying to infuse hope and encourage patients in the midst of a health challenge. And as upper cervical docs, we, a lot of times we're sharing our story, right? We have gone through this process of meaning making for ourselves, and we are very quick to share that with folks, which is a great connecting point. But the level beyond that is for them to make meaning of it for themselves, right? And our job is to help them see for themselves what we see the value, and for it to make sense in their own life, right? So whether you share your story of hope or healing or not, do that as a connecting point, but also make sure that that's what we're trying to facilitate for them. We're trying to make this a life-changing event in their life, right? To be under upper cervical care. So, and that means that their own personal values and their experiences and their beliefs and a lot of other things factor into that. And if we do these other things well, we are setting the stage for them to meaning make of it on their own. And there's a whole bit in the paper. The full text is going to be available here at the end for the actual research article that these concepts are derived from. But they talk a lot about patient beliefs. And it's a really interesting thing, right? We see folks from all walks of life. And, we may have made meaning of upper cervical in our own way through our own experiences, but each patient's entitled to make meaning of it for themselves. And our job as a leader in this model is to help facilitate that.
Yeah, and that's part of also understanding for them to be able to communicate it to others, right? They have to be able to build that own, like you said, they have to have it has to be meaningful to them. What you're doing for them has to be meaningful for them, and they have to own that, right? And then you have to be able to teach them how to testify, right? How to communicate that to others, right? And sometimes that's through just reminding them of where they were and where they are now, so then they can talk to other people about it, right? And so, I mean, that's directly related to your referral generation and those types of things as well, is being able to connect meaning and this type of thing to what they're actually experiencing in your practice.
Well, and speaking of, I mean, the experience of being in your practice is a sensory experience, right? The smell of it, the lighting, the posters you have on the wall, the way you're dressed, the atmosphere that you create. Again, these are all senses that the body and the nervous system are picking up on to help with this process. And so imagine walking into a dusty old office with some hotel art on the wall versus walking into a bright, energetic, vibrant office where that's full of testimonials and you can relate to people that you see 5-star reviews on the wall. These are things that are not insignificant in that reducing those prediction errors in the nervous system. And this is where the synchronization concept comes into play. It's trying to bring all of these verbal, nonverbal, sensory experiences together to create an atmosphere that allows for the patient to maximize their results with upper cervical care. So 5 ways to synchronize the therapeutic alliance. Again, the idea is that sensory experiences allow the nervous system to adjust prior beliefs. So they may have come in as one of those skeptics that thought, chiropractors, they just treat everybody the same. They adjust you forever. There's never any, end of treatment, or there's no progress, like you said. And these are prior beliefs that can be adjusted through the sensory experience of all the things we're talking about. So a couple of things to be aware of on this is I am vehemently against scare care. And I think nocebos and this idea of, implanting harmful ideas that are fear-based and may motivate folks to take action, but really don't empower them for the long term that we're hoping for. I think that's something that has kind of hopefully worked its way mostly out of upper cervical care, but you hear a lot of stories of scare care and those types of tactics in the past with marketing, messaging. So beware of those things. Be mindful that the words that you use in your day-to-day communications, how you explain the impacts of the upper cervical subluxation, how you explain physiology. I mean, be truthful, use integrity with your use of the science of upper cervical, and just be mindful that we're not sabotaging our efforts by accidentally or on purpose introducing these scare care concepts. I did a really good podcast interview with Dr. Jonathan Chung, a NUCA doctor, about the neuroscience of nocebos. And we go way into, how the nervous system does exactly what we're talking about. It will pick up on those clues and then start a process of self-preservation that may find folks out of your office because of those negative sensory experiences.
Can you talk more about what exactly a nocebo is?
Okay, a nocebo is the exact opposite of a placebo, right? So we're familiar with the placebo effect, which is a physiological response to a benign stimulus, right? Someone gets a sugar pill classically in this, placebo-controlled trials, but they have this, positive outcome. We know that it wasn't attributed to the agent that they took, but we know that there was a physiological response to this idea that I'm getting better, right? I'm being treated, I am healing, right? So even just the belief in the practitioner and any outcomes associated with your care has a physiological reaction. The flip of that is the nocebo, which, and this is why I'm not a big fan of, soft colors on patients after adjusting and things like this, is it creates the sense of fragility and the sense of catastrophizing about going out of alignment, or, having an upper cervical subluxation, compressing my brainstem and robbing my life of health potential. Like, these are concepts that we feel strongly about, but I think we need to update our language so that we aren't accidentally implanting these fear-based mechanisms that connect upper cervical to their problems. Because I think, again, chiropractic is about empowerment, right? We're about hope and healing. We're not about sickness and suffering. And so nocebos are basically the exact opposite of placebos. And there's lots of ways that those little sneaky things can work their way into our language if we're not careful.
And I think that the other side of this, though, is making sure that you're not minimizing, right?
Correct.
Minimizing the impact of the subluxation on the person, right?
Yeah.
And I probably see that more than the other, right?
Interesting.
Is the scare care versus just, there's just a little bit of degeneration here, or there's just a little bit of that, or it's not that, you're a little misaligned, like just minimization type words and communication, and not understanding like, hey, this is actually a serious problem. It's something that is impacting the quality of your life. And that's okay to say that. That's not scare care, right?
Yeah, you know what, Dr. Billett, I think the common denominator between both of those is a generalized approach, right? Meaning if you're ultra specific to the patient's physiology, you're ultra specific to their needs, you're ultra specific to your exam findings for them, you pick and choose the correct mechanisms, and you don't minimize any of it, but you don't overemphasize anything that's not relevant to them, right? Again, the whole thing is, if we are being very purposeful and intentional with the way that we are presenting these concepts in the context of the individual patient, I think you're way less likely to have these types of things happen on either end of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah.
And that's again, that comes back to the mastery of the science of upper cervical chiropractic and your knowledge of the anatomy, the physiology, the neurology, and all those aspects too. Other things to think about when we're trying to synchronize and we're leveraging the nervous system's sensory experience in our office. The goal is to accumulate verbal, nonverbal, and tactile inputs that correct errors in that predictive processing. So we're talking about thoughtful communication and caring touch. In this particular research article, they went on and on about C-tactile fibers and the benefit of hands-on therapeutic touch, which, as chiropractors and upper cervical chiropractors, we're all in on that, right? We're hands-on, as soon as we can be, but don't minimize the impact of the high five to the patient that's doing well, the arm around the shoulder when they're not, taking an extra minute to palpate an area of pain if the patient expresses a concern there, right? These are little things that you can do that go a long way. And that hands-on therapeutic touch, I mean, we all know from, even through the times with COVID lockdowns and all, that folks are really starving for therapeutic touch. And it does have an outcome or it does have an impact on our outcomes. And let's say a patient's holding their adjustment. I mean, do you rush out of the room and just go on to the next one, or do you take a minute, pat them on the back, shake their hand, just put have a hands-on moment with that eye contact, celebrate the win that they're holding, right? These are little things that, accumulate over the course of the visits and the total experience.
Yeah.
In the biopsychosocial model of pain science, this is something that always aggravated me. And I think that's where these concepts become very interesting to me is, in the pain science world, this biopsychosocial model has been touted, but it was very airy-fairy and not very actionable. But the idea of connecting with folks on different levels is person-centered care, meaning, we are attuned to their chiropractic needs. Your staff may pick up on little things about their life and their family, right? We're just noticing the whole person. We don't need to go too deep on that. But again, like with the connection to your office, you mentioned this from the very beginning, which is these are people, right? People have spines and spines can be subluxated, but we've got to acknowledge that there are other aspects of this person's life and health that could influence how they feel, how they progress with our care. So being aware and connecting on those different levels is really good clinical intel, but it's also good for connecting on a human level. And whether that's something you do personally or your staff is involved with, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there. And that is that person-centered care. And I like to think of this as specificity beyond the listings, right? We are so particular with the specificity of our care and the way that we implement our chiropractic technique objectives. Let's just make sure that all the other parts of the patient experience are likewise attended to with that same level of precision. And collaborative communication is the hallmark of all this stuff. I mean, whether that's among your team, whether that's doctor to patient, patient to team, amongst the team, with your other care providers, folks need to understand that as an ally, as someone who is advocating for their best possible outcome, you can be trusted with information and you can collaborate when it's appropriate to make sure that their outcomes are emphasized. So we've got our three components there. We've got creating meaningful dialogue, promoting active participation, synchronizing that effort. We've got 5 action steps for each of those things. There's way more that we could get into on this. I provide a couple some bonus content here for the listeners. And Dr. Bill will have these resources available in the show notes here. But also feel free to reach out to me if you want access to these. I did a rapid research review on this. So it's a podcast episode dedicated to just going through the finer points of this research paper. You can read it for yourself, or you can listen to me for 20 minutes to give you the really important highlights. The link is here. The podcast I did with Dr. Chung, Mastering the Message, The Science of Nocebo Effect with Dr. Jonathan Chung is here. Full text for the research paper. And then I have this fun little choose your own adventure here for follow-up. There may be higher volume practices listening to this thinking, man, that all sounds great, but this is just unachievable in our systems. It's not. I've got really actionable ways that this can be a team training exercise, that you can emphasize these things with your team. And just for a minute, Dr. Bill, why I think that's so important is to be able to influence your CAs and help them understand that they're not just there to push paper and to click buttons on the computer, right? They actually have a meaningful impact in the patient's outcome. How well the patient does isn't just what happens on the table. It's the whole thing. I mean, can you imagine empowering a CA that when they show up to work, they've got a direct impact on how well these people do, and they can celebrate in those outcomes with you? And that's powerful. So I've got a track with a lot of dedicated resources for that. If you're a solo doc, I mean, the logistics of your practice work a little bit different, and there are some actionable ways that you can make use of this too. That's my style of practice. And so I share a good bit about the ways that I've implemented systems and procedures that leverage these concepts. And we won't get into the nitty-gritty details on that, but if those sound like they're of interest to you, if this tugged at your heartstrings or piqued your interest, or you want to get more specific with it, I'd be happy to connect you with those resources. You can email me, drjstenberg@gmail.com, or Dr. Bill will be able to point you towards those resources as well. But I think it's worth a little bit of time on your part to look through and develop your skills with this, fine tune some of your systems. And at the end of the day, what are we trying to do, Dr. Bill? We're trying to get the best possible outcomes, right? That's why we got into upper cervical work, and anything we can do to stack the deck in our favor, I think is great.
Absolutely. So this is awesome. I'm really appreciated this conversation today, Doc. I think this is some stuff you can apply right away in your practice to more effectively connect with people, the people in your practice, right? That's what it's about. It's about helping them to fully heal with your team, working together to get those great outcomes. So thank you, Doc. Appreciate you. Appreciate your time today. And as we always say, go team upper cervical.